Good morning, everyone. It's Rabbi Akiva Males, and I hope that you're well. Today is Friday. It's October 30th. We're getting ready for Parshas Lech Lecha. I wanted to share a brief Devar Torah with you. We're going to be introduced this morning to a name that we always associate with Avraham Avinu, and that's Avraham HaIvri. Avraham, you might call him the Hebrew, Avraham HaIvri. Where does that name come from? So the pasuk tells us that after his nephew Lot is taken captive, it says, Vayavo Apalit, one who had survived or had escaped from that battle which had ensued in which Lot was taken captive. He approaches Avram. He arrives at Avram's residence, Vayaged Avram HaIvri, and he tells Avram HaIvri, he tells him this news about the war that had taken place and that his nephew had been abducted together with all the people of the town of Sodom and all of their possessions, and they were being held hostage. Avram, as we know the story goes, puts an army together, puts a force together, and fights and is able to liberate Lot as well as all of the residents of Sodom. That's what takes place, one of the events that takes place in the Parsha. But what does that mean, Avram HaIvri? What is that term? So the Mefarshim give us at least three explanations. One is that Ivri, he was a descendant of Aver. We know that one of Avram's ancestors was Aver. We always think about the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. So Avram was a descendant of Aver, so he's Avram HaIvri. That's one. The second is that he was from Aver LeYarden, is that the people who were living in Canaan, what we're going to call Israel later, they viewed Avram as having come from the east, from across the river. So therefore, he's Avram HaIvri because he was from Aver Nahar. He came from the other side of the river. The Medrash tells us, a third reason why he was known as Avram HaIvri. And that had to do with the independent streak that Abraham showed throughout his life. Rav Yehuda Omer, Kol Olam Kulo Me'ever Echad. Avraham Avinu would have been perfectly fine with the entire world being on one side, on one bank of a river, V'hu Me'ever Echad, and he would be all alone on the other. He didn't care. So many of us, we crave social acceptance, and we want to have peers that are surrounding us, and we're all in the same boat together. Avram didn't care. He was so strong, he had a backbone of steel, that he was perfectly fine knowing and going through life, knowing that he's doing the right thing, that he's following in the Derech Hashem, in God's path, and he was fine with that. He didn't care that he didn't have social acceptance. He didn't care that he didn't have a peer group. He was absolutely fine being all by himself. That's what a third definition of Avraham HaIvri. And that's something that we all look to, because so often we find ourselves as Torah-observing Jews, not only when we're around and surrounded by Jews who aren't observing the Torah and mitzvahs, but when we're surrounded by a world around us that's not Jewish, and of course isn't observing Torah and mitzvahs. We can't be the type of people that are just looking for social acceptance and are craving the peer group. We have to have this attitude of Avraham Avinu. We all have to develop this attitude of being Avraham HaIvri, of finding that strength and that sense of resoluteness, that we're going to stick to the Torah and the mitzvahs, regardless of how many people are with us on this. Of course, it's more comforting if we can put together a social group, if we have a peer group that of like-minded people that'll, of course, be mechazik one another, it'll strengthen each other, of course. But we need to develop that attitude of Avraham HaIvri, that even if everyone's on one bank, I can stand on the other bank and still go strong. That's Avraham HaIvri shows up in this parsha, and that should be an inspiration for each and every one of us as Jews who observe the Torah and the mitzvahs. But here's where we might make the mistake. We might goof and think that if Avram had this sense of being Avraham HaIvri, this streak of independence, not caring what the world thought about him, one may have erred in thinking that also translated into his interactions with the people around him who were not of a similar mindset. One might make the mistake of thinking that Avram was in his own world and just didn't care less about anyone around him. Not only did he not care what they thought of him, but perhaps he didn't care how he treated them either, because he's doing his own thing. But nothing could be further from the truth in that regard. Because let's take a look at something else that occurs in this parsha. In the parak before Avram is called Avraham HaIvri, the pasuk tells us that after leaving Mitzrayim, Avraham, Sarai, Lot, the whole chevra that went together to Egypt, they all left very wealthy from Egypt. And the pasuk tells us, Vayelech l'masa'av, that Avraham went on his journeys. What does that mean? Vayelech l'masa'av? What does that mean? So Rashi gives a couple of explanations. One of the explanations of Rashi is as follows. Vayelech l'masa'av, he went according to his journey. So Rashi says, Keshechazar miMitzrayim le'eretz Canaan, when he left Egypt and returned to Canaan, hayaholech v'lan b'achsanios shalom ben belichas ol Mitzrayim. He went out of his way and he made a point of staying at every of the same motels, at every one of the inns, at every one of the stops where he may have stopped over on his way down to Egypt. On his return to Canaan, he says, I'm going to make a real point of staying in those places, stopping in again, and continuing that relationship that I had begun. Why? Lamedcha derech eretz. Avram Avinu was teaching us derech eretz. What's proper etiquette, proper conduct? Shelo yishana adam me'achsan yishalo. A person shouldn't change their lodgings. If you've already begun to develop a relationship with some people, don't ignore that. If I'm back in that same area, I'm back in that same locale, go again and strengthen that relationship. Don't give that person the impression that perhaps I was unhappy with the degree of service I received. Make them nervous. Oh my gosh, they're going to write a bad review of me online now. Go and stay again and keep that relationship strong. That's the derech eretz that Abraham had and what he was trying to teach us moving forward. Rashi's quoting a Gemara in Erechin, and obviously this is a lima. This is something instructive for us throughout eternity. Now, if we stop and think about this for a minute, who was Avram showing derech eretz to? These weren't necessary to like-minded individuals. Avram wasn't living in a world of monotheism. He was introducing this concept to the world. The people he's showing derech eretz to are the locals, whoever they happen to be. The same way he was willing to go out of his way and feed those travelers who happen to have been angels, but he didn't know that, who come through his house in next week's Parsha in Vayera. The same way he's showing derech eretz to everybody. That's the same derech eretz he's showing to those people who own those inns and those hostels, hotels. He says, I have to show them common decency, treat them like I would want to be treated. And that's what he's teaching us. So here's Avram. He's Avram Avery. He says, when it comes in, if I ever feel a challenge, the world around me is not on my page when it comes to the way I want to conduct myself, I'm going to take a different road. I'll be absolutely independent. And I'll let the whole world be on one bank, and I'll be on the other bank. I'll be absolutely independent. That's Avram Avery. But at the same time, he was so sensitive and he cared so much to the feelings, the nuances, the concerns of those people around him who aren't on the same page. That's our role model, because we all find ourselves in that position. We are Torah-committed Jews, and we have to live lives absolutely in line with the Torah and the mitzvahs. But we're living in a world of people all around us who are not living lives of Torah and mitzvahs. Unfortunately, there's so many Jews who aren't living lives of Torah mitzvahs. But then there are all the Gentiles and non-Jews around us. They don't have to live lives of Torah mitzvahs. They have to live moral lives, the laws of Shiva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, the 7 universal laws of mankind, but they're not bound to our laws. So one might make the mistake of thinking, I don't have to act towards derech eretz with them. I'm just focusing on what I need to do, and that's it. Absolutely not. Avram Avinu is our role model. Yes, we have to be absolutely committed to the Torah and mitzvahs. And I could care less about the rest of the world. That's not going to sway me. What they're doing is not going to sway me from my actions of living life of Torah and mitzvahs. But I do have to care about the rest of the world when it comes to showing them common decency, respect, being a good citizen, being a good neighbor. Avram Avinu is the epitome of this. He's our role model, and he's a personality, and these are traits that we should all emulate. I think about this today especially. As I said, today is October 30th. That means tomorrow is October 31st. And we all know that this is a day here is commonly referred to as Halloween. And Halloween is a time, it's not our holiday. It's not a Jewish holiday. We don't celebrate this. None of us need to be celebrating this. None of us should celebrate this. It's got dark origins. It's got some pagan origins. But our neighbors around us, they're not Jews, and they have no reason to desist from enjoying Halloween, and they're not celebrating the pagan origins of it. It's an excuse for kids, our neighbors. They're beautiful little children, to put on their princess outfits, to put on their superhero costumes, dressed like Batman and Superman, their Star Wars heroes, whoever it may be, and just go around enjoying wearing their costumes and asking their neighbors for candy. Some might think that was still, I'm going to be Avram Avery. This isn't mine, and we shouldn't bring this into our routines, into our lives. And of course, we're not celebrating it, but we want to be good neighbors. And as a kid growing up, I remember that's what our family always did. We grew up on a block. We were the only Shomer Shabbos family on the block, but there were a lot of non-Jewish kids on the block. And I looked forward to it every year. I was so excited to see what costumes were going to come to our house. And we'd give them a little candy or something. That's what being a good neighbor is all about. And I remember when I left to go to yeshiva, I would speak to people and they would tell me that they had never done this. They'd never heard of this before. So I was a little suspicious. How could it be that this is what we did in Cleveland and no one else did this? And I came to realize that no, there are many, many great Jews who conducted themselves in the same exact fashion. I want to share with you 2 examples. The first one is Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal. So this is actually brought down in the Art Scroll biography of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. Let me read to you one paragraph. It's on page 243. Rav Yaakov, at the end of his life, when he moved from Brooklyn, he spent the last number of years of his life in Monsey, New York. Here's a paragraph. Someone was visiting Rav Yaakov shortly after he moved to Monsey when some Halloween trick-or-treaters rang the bell. Parentheses, Monsey was not yet the largely Jewish town it is today. The man assumed that Rav Yaakov would not be familiar with such a non-Jewish custom from his years of living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and hastened to explain to him what the children wanted. Rav Yaakov was not only familiar with Halloween, the Rebbitzin had already prepared bags of sweets for any children that might ring. So you can just imagine that scene. Here's this person thinking, here's this elderly European Rosh Yeshiva. He has no idea what's going on. It's my job to explain to him the way things are going on in America. And Yaakov saying, I know, I got it under control. The Rebbitzins already prepared candy. Don't, you're not teaching me anything. This is the way we conduct ourselves. No one could accuse Rav Yaakov of straying from Derech HaTorah here. He was acting exactly like Avram Ivri. He was absolutely resolute in terms of being committed to Torah and mitzvahs, but at the same time, how can I be a good neighbor? How can I be a good citizen? How can I be nice to the kids who are going to knock on our doors? That's what he was thinking. That's how he acted. And I want to share with you one more example of this as well. My father-in-law, Olav Shalom, was a close student of Rav Avram Yaakov HaKohen Pam. Rav Pam was a Rosh Yeshiva for decades in the Mesivta Yeshiva Torah V'das in Brooklyn. And my father-in-law had been in his shir for several years in the 1960s. When Leila's sister, Gitti, when she and her husband, Shlomo, when they became engaged in the early 1990s, it was way before I came into the family, but when they became engaged in the early 1990s, so my father-in-law was so happy that his daughter had just gotten engaged, he wanted to bring her and his new son-in-law, who not yet married, but is soon-to-be son-in-law, wanted to bring them to meet Rosh Yeshiva, his Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Pam and the Rebbitzin, and to get a bracha from them. They also wanted to ask if Rav Pam would honor them with being the Mesader Kedushin, officiating at their upcoming wedding. So they made an appointment. My father-in-law called, they made an appointment, and they arranged to go stop by Rav Pam's house and to meet and get a bracha, schmooze for a little bit. They arrived. As they're arriving, pulling out of their car, going into the Pam's house, they realized, they looked at what's going on around them. Oh my gosh, we didn't realize it's October 31st. It's Halloween night. And they noticed that around many of the Jewish neighbors of the Palms, their lights were off at the front of the house. They obviously wanted to discourage anyone from coming and knocking, ringing their bell. But the light was nice and shining bright in front of the Palms house. They were ready to be good neighbors. And what ended up happening? So they go inside, and Rav Pam and his Rebbitzin, they greeted them so warmly. They welcomed them. They gave them tons of brachas, gave them some hugs. And Rebbitzin Pam retreats to the kitchen. Rav Pam's talking with them in the dining room, living room. Rebbitzin Pam retreats to the kitchen. What was she doing in the kitchen? She was feverishly working the hot air popcorn popper. She was making bags, little pekalach, making bags of fresh popcorn for all the neighborhood kids, the non-Jewish kids who would come ring their bell, knock at their door because it was Halloween. And she wanted to answer with a smile, a nice grandmotherly smile, and give the local kids, give them something. And they left with such an impression from that night. Of course, they left with tons of good feelings about the brachas and the smiles and the hugs they had gotten from Rav and Rebbitzin Pam. That was true. But they left also it made a huge impression on them. Well, look what the Pams were doing. They, like Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, the same idea of Avram Avinu. This is what they were doing. They lived lives of being Avram Ivri. They were absolutely committed to Torah and mitzvahs. The whole world could have abandoned Torah and mitzvahs, and they would have remained on track. But at the same token, they cared about their neighbors and the citizens of the world around them. And they said, what can we do to act with derech eretz to them? So she was working her hot air popcorn popper to prepare little pekala, little bags to give out fresh popcorn, warm bags of popcorn to the kids. That made such an impression on them. Leila and I, what we've done for the last number of years is that, we've prepared a little, like a TV dinner table outside our door with a big a bowl of individually wrapped candies for the kids. This way we don't have to come in and answer the door every time it rings. If I'm not home, Leila doesn't always feel comfortable opening the door at night. Whatever it may be, there's ways to do this. What's everyone going to do this year? I don't know. All the local health departments are advising families what to do or not do if their kids are going to be out. I don't know. I think what we're going to do is the same thing. Shabbos afternoon, I'll just put outside the TV dinner tray with a bowl of candy there. This way kids come and, I don't know, I'll probably be at Shul. It'll be Matzah Shabbos this year. But whatever it may be, it could be Halloween. It could be other times of the year, whatever it is. Let's emulate Avraham Avinu. Let's be absolutely committed Jews. Let's never budge from our commitment to Torah and mitzvahs. But at the same token, we need to remember this other part of Avraham Avinu, that as committed as he was and as independent as he was, as separated as he was from the rest of the world, he always remained a good citizen, a good neighbor, acting with derech eretz, making a good impression upon everyone. What does an Eved Hashem look like, and how does he interact? Someone who really has a relationship with God, how do we interact with the world around us? With a smile, being nice. And if we do that, we could make a Kiddush Hashem, and we'll be following an example of Avraham Avinu. We'll be Avraham Ivri, but at the same token, we'll be following his lead about acting with derech eretz, proper etiquette, and making a positive impression on all of our neighbors and all the people around us. Have a good Shabbos, everyone.